mics, unless Demi is asking you guys to share or she has any interpersonal sharing stuff, she'll have you unmute it. And if you want to pin her as the speaker, you just like click her face and then hit pin the speaker as the main one, and it will close out the rest of the gallery. Or if you like watching gallery view, that's cool too.
So my goal is to have some time at the end for some questions. But during the presentation, if any questions come up or you're kind of like, whoa, can you say that again or describe that again? Feel free to just pop a question into the chat box. I'll try to kind of retouch on anything if you didn't get it in the moment, but we can answer questions at the end in the chat. So looking to kind of wrap this up a little bit early, maybe 40 minutes of presentation and then 10-ish minutes for questions.
Oh, I have one last question. How would you like your participants to utilize the chat bar? Do you want them to be asking questions as you go along so that you can touch those?
Yeah, you can feel free, as questions come up, feel free to type them in. And then what I'll do is come and answer them at the end, because that's just going to be a lot more flowy than trying to answer them as we go along. But I'll be keeping an eye on them. And if something comes up that you're like, wait, can you express that again? I'll try to give that a little time at that moment. But otherwise, kind of put your questions in the chat box and we'll do a little Q&A at the end.
Okay. Do you mind if I do a brief introduction to you as coming onto our team and how long you've been working with us?
Totally. Yeah.
Our viewers for later on have that information. So welcome everyone to Ancestral Nutrition. This is a free virtual class led by Demi, who is a nutrition therapist, and she has been working with us on the Shala team for several months now. We've been working together on launching this program for ancestral health, and we're making the transition in both our virtual studio and in our brick and mortar to really educating people on gut health, how to cultivate a deep relationship with food and the process of making food, consuming, and how you feel after. So I'm really excited for the information that Demi is going to be sharing today. And just so you know, a lot of time went into creating this program that we are launching next week. So we have one flight starting tomorrow, and then we have another one starting on May 12th. So if you're interested in taking part in her nutrition challenge, it's a virtual challenge, and you get a lot of really awesome components of that, including the manual that she's been working on for several months, integrating some of these practices into it. You also get accountability. You get a meal prep lesson with me where I'll be filming it live as well. So we'll share that. I'll share that in the chat bar if anyone is curious about that. And I'm just really grateful, Demi, that you came to us when you did. It seemed like a really perfect fit. I remember sitting down with you and being like, wow, we are so aligned. And I'm just so grateful that you're coming onto our team and that you're going to be providing our members, both in Bellingham and beyond, accountability with these programs, because there's so much more depth that we can go into with our eating. And I think you've just developed a really awesome program. So I'm pumped to share it.
Me too. Thank you, Summer. Okay. So yeah, today is definitely going to be a really good introduction and overview into ancestral nutrition and what we're doing here at the studio. And as Summer mentioned, if you find that you want more information, you want more support, you want more accountability in this work, we have this virtual nutrition challenge coming up this week, next week, and those are going to be really great opportunities to dig into that more. But for now, I'm going to get started. So I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So welcome. This is a presentation on optimizing health with ancestral nutrition, and I want to introduce myself. My name is Demi, and tell you a little bit about my journey to get to where I am today and why I'm sharing this with you. So 12 years ago, when I was 17, I started to have a lot of chronic digestive issues that were also paired with anxiety issues, stress, improper nutrition, and sleep, and a lot of body image issues that caused me to have disordered eating. I was also vegetarian at the time and just wasn't doing it right, wasn't supporting my body right. And I began to find the healing power of food and learning about good nutrition, good food, and finding what foods didn't work for me. And ever since then, over the last 12 years, it's been this roller coaster. Although I found a lot of relief then, I've had to work on it because other things have come up, like autoimmune diseases and more anxiety and stress issues, more issues with over-exercising and under-eating, and fear of like carbohydrates, which led me to lose my period and have hormonal issues. I traveled for a long time and collected a lot of stomach bugs along the way, which I went on many rounds of antibiotics and really messed up my microbiome, dealt with candida overgrowth, just this whole gamut of things. And through all these symptoms, I found myself just spending all my time researching and reading and listening to podcasts and digging into nutrition and how I can help myself heal. And that's what led me to Ancestral nutrition and finding the diet that worked best for me. And it became really clear that this was my path, was to help other people heal and connect to their body and earth through food. And so my philosophy is that healthy people equal a healthy planet. And one of the best ways we can connect to body and earth is through our food. So now I am certified as a nutritional therapy practitioner, and that's what I'm helping people do. And my diet this day feels so intuitive and so sustainable and very easeful and very nourishing to my body. And of course, I still have health things that I'm working through. It can be a long process, but I find that I have no, severe symptoms. I feel quite energized. I can do all the things I want to do. And I also don't struggle with really intense cravings or anything. I just crave really good, nourishing food for my body. And so I just want to share all this with you because maybe you identify with some of these symptoms. Maybe you've experienced some of this yourself. And just to emphasize how important food is for the healing process and that you can find a diet that works for you that feels really sustainable. So I just want to define what ancestral nutrition means to me. Basically, it's just eating whole, nutrient-dense foods as close to their natural state as possible. We're looking at what humans have eaten for the majority of our time on the earth. So it's what we've evolved to eat and what we are designed to eat. So we look at eating more like our ancestors, whether that's our hunter and gatherer ancestors or our great-great-grandparents and how they traditionally prepared food. And we're eating less from the standard American diet, or also known as the SAD diet. And the SAD diet is really just a lot of those refined processed carbs and sugar and processed fats, which really entered our world during the Industrial Revolution and through the rise of big food like Pepsi and Coca-Cola and Kellogg and chemical revolution. We got all these hyper palatable foods, like these foods that have this beautiful, perfect ratio of like sugar, fat, and salt that like we crave and we get addicted to, and we have a really hard time stopping eating those. So there's a lot against us, and that's why we're coming back to this traditional knowledge of how to prepare our food, how to source our food, what we're putting into our body. And so ancestral nutrition is really just merging that traditional knowledge with modern science. And why does that matter? Well, if we look at the health of our nation and a species as general, we see that we have a ton of obesity, diabetes, metabolic diseases, chronic health conditions. A lot of us experience extreme fatigue or dependence on prescription drugs just to deal with our symptoms. And there's been a huge rise in digestive disorders, autoimmune diseases, and cardiovascular disease, which is the #1 killer in our nation. So it's obvious that something needs to change. And although there's many factors that contribute to all of these issues, we can see that the SAD diet is not helping. And it's actually probably, and really one of the most reasons that we are having a lot of these issues. So I just want to talk a little bit about Dr. Weston Price. He was a dentist who founded the National Dental Association. And in the early 1900s, he traveled around the world comparing traditional cultures and contrasting their diets with those of industrialized countries. And given that time and history, he was able to directly compare the health of those who ate traditional diets to those who had adopted these westernized foods. And he observed this rapid decline in health when these previously healthy populations transitioned from their traditional diets and started eating the more modern processed diets. So there was a lot of tooth decay and poor bone density and development and a lot of chronic diseases. And he could link them to nutrient deficiencies and nutrient poor foods found in these modern industrialized diets. One thing though is that he didn't find one diet that fit all cultures. There was actually quite a variety in what they ate and what made them healthy, but he broke it down into two commonalities that were part of all these cultural diets. And one was that all of them obtain fat-soluble vitamins from animal sources. And I just want to make a note, if you are vegetarian or vegan, like this doesn't exclude having a healthy ancestral diet, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. He also discovered that they consumed properly prepared foods in their whole form. There's a few other things that he observed that I just want you to keep in mind because they're going to come back up in this presentation and I'll point them out to you. All the seeds, grains, legumes, and nuts, they were soaked, sprouted, or fermented. And the fat content of these diets varied from 30 to 80%, which is a huge range. But only 4% of those came from polyunsaturated fats. And those fats are like our vegetable oils. The diets contained an equal balance of omega-3s and omega-6s. They all contained some unrefined salt and made use of bones, particularly bone broth. Okay, so what is our ancestral nutrition template? So as Dr. Price observed, there was not one diet that fit all, and that's the same these days. There is not one diet that's going to fit everyone. We are all bio-individual, and so what works for you is not going to work for someone else. And so we consider our lifestyle factors, our genetics, our stress levels, our health goals, our activity levels, all of that comes into play. And what this is a template that if you follow this template, it's going to support your health in so many different ways, no matter who you are. And then within that template, you can figure out exactly what works for you. So part of that template is that we really want to connect with where we're getting our food and how it's grown and how it's supporting the earth. So just as best as we can, we want to source local, organic, seasonal, and sustainable. We also want to prepare our foods as they were traditionally. Again, that's like the soaking, the sprouting, and the fermenting. And we want to optimize our digestion so we can actually absorb the vitamins and minerals from our food. And within this food, we want to get an optimal balance of macronutrients. So that's going to be eating a wide variety of plants for those micronutrients and for our fibers. And when we're sourcing animal products, we're really looking at grass-fed, pasture-raised, and wild-caught seafood. And this template includes a lot of good healthy fats. So we're looking at grass-fed butter and ghee, organic virgin pressed coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil, avocados, avocado oil, lard, and tallow. And a little quick tip about some of the most nutrient-dense foods. One of the most nutrient-dense foods is organ meat, like liver, which is not very popular. And if you're interested, I have some tips on how to get that into your diet more, especially if you don't like the taste. Seafood, especially for the omega-3 content, and colorful veggies for those micronutrients. And we have some gray area foods. So dairy, as many of you know, dairy can be really hard to digest for many people. That's because it can be quite highly inflammatory on the gut. But if you find that dairy works well for you, it's really important that you just focus on the source, because a lot of the problems come with that pasteurized, homogenized, the added hormones and antibiotics, the low fat. So it's looking at that full fat grass-fed again, fermented, which is going to help you digest it better. So your yogurt and kefir. And if you have problems with cow dairy, you might look at goat and sheep dairy because that can be a lot easier to digest for many people. The other kind of gray area, big section, is when we're looking at our grains, our pseudo grains, and pseudo grains are like quinoa and amaranth. Those are actually seeds. That's why they're called pseudo grains. And our legumes, and also our nuts and seeds. Why this is a gray area is just because they have enzyme inhibitors. So enzymes are part of our body that break down all our food. And these items have phytic acid and lectins and other things that actually are their natural defense mechanism that prevent our digestive systems to break them down. And so therefore they just can stay in our system in kind of this whole form, not being broken down, and they can wreak havoc on our GI tract. And then they can negatively affect how we digest and absorb other food. So again, coming back to what Dr. Price discovered, seeds, grains, legumes, and nuts were all soaked, sprouted, or fermented. So that's what you want to do with these items, is to properly prepare them by soaking, sprouting, or fermenting. And you also can see this in nature. Squirrels will collect their nuts and hide them underground to allow them to sprout before they eat them, because they're trying to break down the natural defense mechanism of the nuts. So there's a lot of resources online for finding how to properly do this. And again, it's within that template, finding what works for you. If you notice you're having symptoms and reactions to some of these foods, try properly preparing them, or try avoiding them for a little bit of time and see if those improve. So just a bit about what we can benefit from limiting in our diets. Those refined processed carbs and those refined artificial sugars, they cause us a lot of problems. Same with those like hydrogenated trans fatty acids like margarine and shortening, which is becoming more apparent in our general health knowledge. And then all those vegetable oils like canola, soy, corn, cottonseed, sunflower, safflower, peanut, palm kernel oil. The tricky thing with this, if you go out to eat, everything's cooked in vegetable oils. And part of ancestral nutrition or just general health is like, go out and eat, like enjoy your life, enjoy yourself. It's just be aware of how much you're getting. So maybe that means at home, you cook with really healthy oils and you just reduce your load. So you're able to go out and enjoy yourself a bit more. It's just bringing some awareness and balance to everything. And then again, highly processed refined foods and artificial ingredients, we want to limit as much as possible. Now, these next two bullet points can be sensitive for people. Soy, corn, peanuts, why might we want to limit those? They just tend to be highly inflammatory, and a lot of people have allergies and sensitivities to these products. Soy can be really off-balancing for women's hormones, and corn is a high GMO and highly processed product. So if you want to eat it, I recommend just an organic whole food form. And then peanuts, they just can go rancid very easily, especially the oil or when it's in peanut butter. And again, it means just paying attention to how it feels in your body. Maybe if you're having symptoms, you can pay attention to if it's linked to eating one of these things or not, and just experiment with it. You don't have to completely eliminate it. It's just being aware. And then gluten and wheat, as many of you probably know, a lot of people have a lot of issues with gluten. This is because it's a protein that has this chemical structure that is super resistant to the enzymes that want to break it down in our body. And so it can like stay intact and just like stay in our GI tract and cause a bunch of problems and just cause all this inflammation. So again, it's coming back to, if you want to eat it, just try to source it from a properly prepared source. Maybe try soaking it, or sourdough. Sourdough is a traditional way of making bread that helps break down the gluten, and it makes it a lot easier to digest. So making your own sourdough or sourcing sourdough, again, it's that bio-individual thing. Find what works for you. Pay attention to any reactions. Just see how you can make these nutrients more available to you. So we're going to get into macronutrients and why they matter. Our macronutrients are our protein, our carbs, and our fat. And we need all three of those so we can fuel and build our body and ensure that we have stable energy and balanced blood sugar. So that's what keeps our energy stable all day. And if you've ever experienced like that 3 p.m. crash, it has to do with the blood sugar not staying stable throughout the day. And then it helps us have our metabolism optimal and provides all the nutrients our bodies need. So they each like play an important role alone, and then they work together in the body. So breaking it down into protein, that's what builds our muscles, our tissues, our organs, and our nerves. It also builds our antibodies. So think immune system support, which is really important right now. It helps build our neurotransmitters. So that's what helps us think and feel and act, and also helps us with our mood. So especially if there's any mental health things that we're working through, protein in the diet is going to be important. And then, as I've mentioned already about enzymes a couple times, they're extremely important for all these processes in our body, and protein helps us build enzymes. So one thing just to note about protein is it's made of amino acids, and there are 9 that are essential. And what that means is that our body cannot make those 9 amino acids on our own. We have to get them from our food. That's why it's important to have a variety of quality protein sources. And if you're a vegetarian, that's just focusing on those like pasture-raised eggs and grass-fed dairy products if you tolerate them well, and definitely including beans and legumes into your diet, just properly preparing them as much as you can. And you also would probably benefit from looking into a high-quality protein powder too, if you aren't consuming animal products. So carbs are sugars, our starches, our fiber. So carbs provide glucose, which is another way of saying our blood sugar. It's that quick fuel for our brain and our muscles. It's found in fruits and veggies, and it provides the fiber that feeds our gut bacteria and helps us eliminate all our waste. So it's really important. And some of the best forms are from starchy veggies, fruits, and grains and legumes if you tolerate it. And today there's like a lot of hype around carbohydrates. There's a lot of hype around low carb diets and ketosis and a keto diet. And I just want to emphasize that like that doesn't work for everybody. That's something you can experience with, but you just want to consider that if you're someone who is an athlete or you do high intensity activity, you're going to want a higher carb percentage in your diet. And if you're a female, you're also going to want to have a little bit more of a moderate higher carb percentage in your diet because our hormones need it. Or if you're under a lot of stress, having a bit of a moderate higher carb percentage is going to help support that. There's a couple situations where lower carb might be beneficial, and that's in the case if you have PCOS or insulin resistance or diabetes or pre-diabetes. Okay, and then fat. Fat is what builds our cells. So if you think of the saying, you are what you eat, that is kind of what's happening here. Fat is building our cells. So the fats you consume is what's going to build up your body and build up your cells. So if you're eating low fat or really poor quality fats, that is what is building your cells, and it can compromise your body at a cell level and make you a little more vulnerable to disease. And that's why quality really matters in this template, and also because toxins can build up really easily in fat tissue. So we really emphasize high quality fat sources. Also, fats are a big part of healing. It's part of the inflammatory process, and that's how we heal. So if you're having any health issues, fat's going to be a really important part of your macronutrient balance. And it's a dense energy source. It tastes really good, and it makes us feel full. And it's really important to be able to absorb our fat-soluble vitamins. And it can help reduce the speed that we digest food, which helps keeps us full longer. There's the 3 main types. We have our saturated, which is like coconut oil, butter, and then the polyunsaturated, monounsaturated is more like our avocados, nuts, and seeds, and those vegetable oils. And then you may have heard of omega-3s, omega-6s. Those are our essential fatty acids. We get a lot of omega-6s in our diet already, especially in the SAD diet. We get them from grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, and processed vegetable oils. So we are really looking to up our omega-3 balance. So we get that by eating a lot more fatty fishes, or walnuts, flax seeds, hemp seeds. And I want to remind you of what Dr. Price discovered back in the 1900s, is that all these traditional cultures had nearly equal amounts of omega-3 and omega-6s. Also, that their fat content varied from 30 to 80%, but only 4% came from polyunsaturated fats, which means they were eating a lot more saturated fats, which we'll get into next. But we just look for upping our omega-3s as much as we can to help get that ratio a little more balanced. So I just feel like this is really important. This is a lot of information, but this part is really important just to mention, being that our whole food system in the United States is built on the low-fat diet, and the idea that fat is bad and that it causes heart disease. And this began in the early 1950s when heart disease was on the rise, and nutritional scientists were scrambling to figure out a way to help reduce it. And there was one study done that didn't have a lot of basis, but they took that to make it the diet heart hypothesis that said saturated fat and cholesterol was evil. It was causing cholesterol to become too high and causing heart disease. And that is what our entire food system has been built on. So all those saturated fats were replaced with the vegetable oils and trans fats, but that wasn't enough. They needed more sugar and carbohydrates in these foods to make them taste good. Now, just to emphasize, cholesterol is a necessary part of like all our body systems. It is part of every cell and every organ. It's really important. And there's no like real study that has shown that altering cholesterol in the blood actually causes heart disease. And you know, this was done like with good intention to help like save a lot of people. It just wasn't really backed up, and a lot of the organizations kind of ran with it, and it just became popular knowledge, which is definitely changing now. But we can see that heart disease hasn't reduced, and instead it's increased alongside obesity and diabetes. So now we are seeing that studies are showing like processed oil and carbs and sugars are really the component behind heart disease because they're leading to inflammation, and saturated fat and cholesterol help with that healing process. Fat helps with that healing process. So it's not the saturated fat that is causing the heart disease. It's actually a really healthy part of our diet, all in balance, all in proper macronutrient balance. So figuring out your macronutrient ratios, this is not something we're gonna like dig super far into today, being that it's very personalized and bio-individual. But this is kind of the general range that we're looking at. Protein is 19 to 35% of your daily calories. Carbs are 22 to 40%, and fat is 28 to 58%. And this is bio-individual, so you have to consider your activity level. Like we learned, if you're doing more higher intensity training, you're an athlete, you're probably gonna be on the higher end of carbs. You might even need 50% carbs. Also your current health status, current health conditions, your sleep quality, your stress levels, and what your personal health goals are. So this is something that is really good to work with a practitioner on. And this is something that we're also digging really deep in and getting really personalized in the virtual nutrition challenge. Okay, so it wouldn't be a nutrition talk if we didn't talk about digestive health. This is one of the things I'm most passionate about because it's been the thing I've struggled with the most. And it is said that about 90% of all diseases can be traced back to the health of the gut and the gut microbiome, which is huge. And a big part of that is because 80% of our immune system is in our gut. So our guts are home to trillions of beneficial bacteria that we depend on for our health and survival, and they perform an amazing amount of functions. So that's one of the reasons why eating a plant-rich diet is so important, is that the fiber in those foods is what feeds these bacteria. So in that sense, diet is like the primary influence on the composition of our microbiome, of that balance of good bacteria in our gut. So what we eat is actually more of like, they say you are what you eat, but it's more of like you are what you absorb. If you're not absorbing your food because your gut is compromised, you're not going to get the benefit of healthy food. And what we eat is responsible for more than 60% of that variety of probiotics in our gut. And how well we absorb the food from the vitamins from our food is so dependent on the health of our gut. So again, the variety of plants is going to produce a lot of variety of food for those gut microbiomes. So let's just talk a little bit about digestion. Digestion actually starts in the brain. So we must be in a parasympathetic state, which is also our rest and digest state, to properly break down and absorb our food. And often in our modern world, we're eating when we're stressed, we're rushed, we're eating on the go or while we're driving. We may be looking at our phone or watching TV or reading something while we eat, and that can actually have a detrimental effect on our digestion. So when we begin to eat, when our brain notices that we're eating, it sends the saliva to begin in our mouth and the enzymes that are part of breaking that food down. So if that signal's missed, that's going to be compromised, and everything further down the digestive tract will be compromised. So when we eat and we often are scarfing down food or not chewing properly, we begin by not breaking it down, and big chunks of food are entering into our stomach and they're not being broken down. And if it gets compromised there, it's going to be compromised down the whole system. And that's where we end up with a lot of the issues we have, like acid reflux from not being broken down in the stomach, leaky gut, or imbalance of gut bacteria. Again, there's a lot to digestive health that will not be covered in this seminar. It's something to really dig, if you do have some symptoms, something to really dig into with a practitioner, but this is just a little bit of a general overview. Some of the causes of digestive issues, besides being stressed or not chewing properly, can be antibiotics or inflammatory foods, or super strenuous exercise, which I'm super guilty of, and not having that balance with enough rest and relaxation and recovery time. Super strenuous activity is stressful on our guts, so we need to make sure we're getting proper rest. And that ties into lack of sleep as well. That's where we rebuild our gut during our sleep, and then poor hydration as well. There are some symptoms that are obvious that are digestive, like abdominal pain, bloating, burping, gas, irregular stools, nausea, vomiting, reflux, and heartburn. But there's other things that are linked to digestion that may not be so obvious. So some of those things are like neurological, like anxiety, ADD and ADHD, brain fog, depression, fatigue, headaches, insomnia. They've also linked Parkinson's and Alzheimer's to gut issues. And then we can see it in our skin. We might have acne or dry skin, itchy skin, psoriasis, and then other things like aches and pains, autoimmune diseases. We might have difficulty with our weight, like maintaining it or losing weight, and then food sensitivities and joint pains. So if we notice any of these symptoms, or we just want to support our digestion overall, there's a few things I can suggest today. Again, we're going to begin in the brain and the mouth. So a really simple thing to do is just smell your food before you eat it, because that's going to send that signal to your brain that you're about to eat, and then it's going to start producing saliva in your mouth. And then if you can just practice taking like 5 deep breaths before you eat, that's going to help you get into that more parasympathetic, relaxed state. And then as best as you can, I know it's really hard sometimes, just like put away the phone or the TV or the reading material and just try to focus on what you're eating, or at least just like stop and sit down and eat as much as you can. Just try to be there just with your food, and then chew every bite as slowly as you can. And honestly, these 4 things can help solve a lot of the digestive distress we experience. Another thing to do is to sip some water with lemon or like a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar in it about 10 minutes before you eat. And that's going to help stimulate that stomach acid production, which helps you break down your food. And then we want to include fermented foods daily. And there is probiotic supplementation as well, which can be useful in many situations, but we gain a much broader range of probiotics from fermented foods. And there was an analysis done of different sauerkraut fermentations, and those had about 686 probiotics, different strains of probiotics versus the usual like 2 to 9 you get in supplements. So if you can include probiotic food, fermented food into your everyday diet, you're going to really support that gut health. And those foods are like our sauerkrauts, our kimchis, kombucha, water, kefir, yogurt, things like that. And then bone broth weekly if possible, because bone broth just has amazing healing properties for the gut. And again, as Dr. Price observed, a lot of cultures traditionally ate a lot of bone broth. And then as we've been talking about, just a nutrient-dense diet with a variety of plant foods, especially prebiotic foods. Those are going to be starchy things like bananas, white rice and potatoes, especially if they're cooked and cooled, have a lot of good prebiotic food for those probiotics in our gut, and even some things like onions. But any starchy vegetables are going to help feed that probiotic bacteria. And again, it's really important to emphasize some lifestyle things of just proper rest and stress management and sleep, getting quality sleep, and then also getting movement, a lot of movement throughout the day, proper movement for your body to keep everything moving throughout your systems. And as we mentioned a bit before, within this template, there's some certain foods that could be inflammatory for you. So really paying attention to what those might be. Maybe keeping a food journal, seeing if you can link any patterns to symptoms you're experiencing, and any digestive reactions to certain inflammatory foods. So we're down to the last 2 slides. One thing that comes up a lot is like, it's really hard to afford good quality food, especially good quality animal products. And so I just wanted to talk about that a little bit and put out an idea of I know it's more expensive, and you know, I'm not perfect, and I do my best at finding my sources and still making it affordable. But health is wealth, right? Common saying that we hear, but like really, if you think about it, sure, there's a lot of foods that are a lot cheaper, but consider the cost of those processed foods on your body. And you consider the possible cost of the healthcare that you might need later down the road. And it actually turns out to be more expensive, not just monetary, but in many ways, than it is to be able to source whole quality nutrient-dense foods. Again, I know that's not accessible for everybody. So a few tips I have is just to like shop around and take note of where certain foods have the best deals. That's something that I've spent time doing. And maybe if you have some good suggestions, pop it into the chat box that we can all share with each other. Buying in bulk is really good. Nuts, seeds, and legumes, those kind of things. But also bigger cuts of meat, maybe from a butcher or a farmer. Or like you can think about if you buy a whole chicken, it's a lot cheaper than cuts of chicken, or like a beef roast is a lot cheaper than steaks. And the thing with like a whole chicken, then you have a carcass to build to make bone broth from. You can also buy things when you notice that they're heavily discounted and put them in the freezer or preserve them. And in general, like frozen seafood, meat, veggies, and fruits tend to be a lot cheaper than fresh. And there's nothing wrong with getting frozen foods. So also just looking for like the cheaper veggies and fruits that can stretch a meal. So like cabbage and carrots, squash, potatoes, kale, lettuce, spinach, like putting things on a bed of lettuce makes the meal go further. Adding in some of these dense starchy carbs makes you more full. Again, some of those quality fats are going to make you feel more full and satiated. And organ meats and bones tend to be cheap. So again, very nutrient dense organ meats, bones, very nutrient dense for bone broth. Those are really cheap items that can bring more nutrients into our meals. And then look into some local farm CSAs or deals that you may have. available to you. And if it's possible, start a garden, even if you can just grow some lettuce and some herbs. That can be very supportive. And again, it's just picking and choosing what works for you. It may not be able to get a certain quality of everything, but this is just a template that you find what you can do within it. So there's been a lot of information, and I just want to give like this just like condensed little snapshot quick start guide of some things that you can do to just start optimizing your health through your nutrition. So for that micronutrient and fiber content, we want to eat a bunch of different veggies, and a good thing to try is 8 different colors a day. And then sourcing your animal products from grass-fed, pasture-raised sources if possible, and including that more of that wild-caught seafood so you can increase your omega-3s, and also the high-quality fats in your diet. Avoid and limiting the amount of processed packaged foods you consume, and avoiding refined oils, carbohydrates, and sugars as much as possible. Including fermented foods in your daily diet, properly preparing your grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds. And then for digestion, smelling your food before eating it, taking some deep breaths, focusing on what you're eating and what's in your mouth, and chewing it as much as possible. And then just paying attention to what foods may not be serving you. Experiment with them, maybe eliminating them for 2 weeks to a month. This may be helpful to work with a practitioner on. And then also paying attention to your energy levels throughout the day and what you need, noticing what macronutrients might work best for you. Do you feel tired after a meal? Maybe you need to get a little more carbohydrate in that meal. Again, this is a great place where a practitioner can really help you, but that's going to help keep that stable energy throughout the day and just make us a lot happier. Okay, so that is what I have for you in terms of slides. We have a little bit of time now to go over some questions. I haven't checked the chat box yet, so I'm going to do that now. And organ meat tips, awesome. Great. I'm going to allow, if you have any questions and you just want to unmute yourself and ask them, we're open for that now. I'm going to say yes, grocery outlet. That's where I get my grass-fed beef, actually. So that's awesome, Leah. Grocery outlet actually has a lot of good sources for like getting good quality fats and stuff in their nosh section. But yeah, I go there for all my grass-fed beef, and sometimes I find like really good wild-caught salmon too. And there's pasture-raised eggs, and yeah, it's great.
Get gluten-free pancake mix there, the Pamela's brand. It's really great.
Awesome.
There's so many things.
So many things. BGO is one of the best sources for sure. Let's see. And then what can we do while eating instead of TV? So is that mostly for your
It's just the kiddo thing. Like I don't know, has to be looking at something. But I'm not paying attention, you know?
Totally.
So I guess I can try to sit down with him more. It's hard, you know, when you're multitasking. So
yeah, I can understand, especially like with children, like just wanting them to eat and sit down, and like how that can be really helpful. And you know, for children too, like they're way more resilient in the way that their digestive system is going to work. If they're getting like quality foods, like if you need them to like focus on something while they eat.
He's on the ADHD spectrum, so we definitely, I'm here for him too. Yeah, I think it's just a family thing. We definitely need to work on that. So
yeah, I mean, I'm so guilty of it too. I focus a lot on mindful eating, but I'm not perfect all the time.
And this time is really hard, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's picking and choosing your battles too, right? So it's like if it feels like too much to try to get him to just focus on his food, like there's nothing wrong with having him watch something or read something, but maybe it's like every once in a while you can try to incorporate something else, like maybe it is sitting outside and eating and we're just paying attention to the birds or what we're seeing around us. Or we can play games with like, what does that smell like? What does that taste like? What does that texture feel like? Like how many chews can you count in this bite? You know, something like that. But again, like I just don't bring stress into it. Just find how you can balance that out. And if there's times where you can maybe incorporate more mindfulness, like that's only going to benefit him now to start learning that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then you also said something about organ meat tips. This might be gross, but what I like to do is I will just freeze some like organic chicken liver. And this old German man told me about this.
Where do you buy it?
I buy it from the co-op.
Okay. In frozen section or?
No, it's not frozen there. I freeze
Okay.
it myself. And I'll cut it up and put it in my smoothie, and you cannot taste it. I promise you. I do not like the taste of liver. I hate it. But you cannot.
So it's frozen or it's cooked or what? How do you do it?
Yeah, so I just freeze it. It's raw and I just freeze it, and I freeze it for a couple days before I use it, and then I cut it up and just cut little bits of it and then throw it in the smoothie, and you can't taste it. Another thing that works well is combining it with like ground beef, because that masks the taste really well. And so those are the two things that I found that work for me. I have not enjoyed it any other way, but the smoothie tip has been pretty life-changing for getting more organ meat into my life.
And sorry, you said chicken liver?
Yeah, I do chicken because
Okay.
I don't like the beefy taste. That's a little too much for me. So
But liver versus any other organ?
Liver is just one of the most nutrient dense.
Okay.
You totally explore other organs. I just probably don't have the organ meats are still hard for me. So I have eaten pate too, but it's not one of my favorites. But that's another option, pate, like they eat in France.
Fancy.
Yeah, so Ancestral, so I just want to say that like this template can, like I don't want to exclude anyone who is vegan. There are certain nutrients that we really only get from animal sources that are really important, and bone broth is also really, really important just for gut healing, but there's other options you can use to support gut healing, and you can also focus on nutrient density without animal products. So if you're vegan and you're not eating dairy or eggs, again, it's just that you're going to focus on a huge variety of vegetables. You're going to focus on a variety of nuts and seeds and beans and legumes, and you're probably going to include grains and pseudo grains. I would just highly encourage properly preparing them. And then you might just need to bring in some supplementation. So like a quality B vitamin supplement. And if you need some gut healing, L-glutamine is a really good healing like powder you can use. That's what's produced in bone, one of the things produced in bone broth. So the butter and ghee or MCT oil and coffee, it's definitely been like a hyped up thing, right? But I think a lot of that comes from two reasons. One, because it's going to slow the absorption of caffeine in our system. And a lot that was kind of started for intermittent fasting. So the idea was like, instead of eating in the morning, you're going to put butter, MCT oil in your coffee, and that's going to help you feel a little more full and sustained so that you can continue your intermittent fast until you eat lunch. So that's the main thing. Again, it's just kind of seeing what works for you. Does it seem to benefit you? I wouldn't be worried about it unless you think that you're having like too much fat in your diet and you're noticing that it's like disrupting your digestion, especially if that happens right after. But otherwise, like it's another way to get more quality fats in your diet. Autoimmune disease. Yeah, so I hate this one because I have autoimmune disease too, and I love eggs. And I've struggled to cut them out, but I know eggs, particularly the egg whites, can be very inflammatory for autoimmune, and also nuts and seeds and nightshades. So you're pretty spot on with the nightshades. One of the best ways to do it is to follow maybe an autoimmune protocol, taking out all those foods, which honestly I've done it before, but I've struggled with, and following a reintroduction just to see if you notice any flare-ups, which can be hard. Like mine is psoriasis, so it's a skin thing, and it can take weeks before a flare-up happens. So you really just have to kind of give yourself probably a month, cut out those foods that are known to inflame autoimmune diseases, and then really slowly introduce them in one by one, which can be a tedious process, but that's the best I've heard for it. Unless you just want to try one at a time, like cut out eggs for a month and see if that improves, kind of seeing what works best for you. And maybe working with a practitioner is really awesome in that situation. Bone broth, I just love putting it in a crock pot or maybe an instant pot if you have that. I get bones like from the co-op freezer section, or maybe you can find a source from a farmer, and you just put them in. I have a recipe that I can maybe share in the chat, but we're getting pretty close on time. But there's a really good, if you search like nourishing traditions, I'll type that in. And there's tons of recipes on Google as well, but Nourishing Traditions is one of the classical books that is founded off the Weston Price Foundation. And it's basically, I just cover